Oh yeah, welcome everyone. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Julia Burrows, Senior Policy Advisor to Mayor Darrell Steinberg.
Good morning, everyone. So nice to be here. I feel like this is a reunion for many of my friends that I have known since the city of Roseville days when I was working in economic development. I feel like Gary is part of my family, and to JD as well. So nice to see you on the Zoom broadcast here. I've been asked to talk a bit about what is happening in our region. And of course, we know everything has changed since the beginning of the year. But I wanted to highlight 5 key areas where I think we have done a lot of work in the planning stages so that now we're ready to implement. And this is no better time than to hit the ground running, both from a workforce perspective, because as we know, we have been hit really hard across the country and here in Sacramento on the job front, but also from an environmental justice perspective. So I'm going to cover very quickly 5 initiatives. I can send out through Thomas links to more information, but I'm just going to hit some highlights about what's been happening in the mayor's office and in our region. I had the good fortune of joining Mayor Steinberg's office as a senior policy advisor exactly 1 year ago, after I did a stint with the Governing Institute. And before that, I was an appointed climate commissioner on the Mayor's Climate Commission because of my background in sustainability, and went from sitting on the dais in Sacramento City Hall to actually staffing the Mayor's Climate Commission along with the local government commission. So Thomas, I think there's a slide with a list of the topics that I'm going to speak to here, which includes that climate commission. Also that the city has a general plan and a climate action plan that's underway, and we need all of you to help us comment on that. I'm sure you've read about the CARES Act funding that has come into both the city of Sacramento and the county. And I'm going to correct something on this slide when I get to the county allocations. Trish Kelly and Valley Vision just released the CEDS, the Community Economic Development Strategy, which qualifies our region for U.S. Economic Development Administration dollars. And so I'll highlight that because that has great applicability to the work of Clean Start. And then I want to close on what I think is the most important work that the mayor's office and our community will be doing starting this summer once the Climate Commission is finished with that. So just to highlight the Mayor's Climate Commission, it's an 18-month process. Is coming to a close on June 29th. It's the final meeting of mayors, plural, Mayor Steinberg and Mayor Cabalden appointed a climate commission, and they are making recommendations in 3 key sectors. The first is the built environment, the second, mobility, and the third, community health and resiliency. And many of you participated in some of the technical advisory committees of the Climate Commission. And so there'll be recommendations made so that both cities will become carbon neutral by 2045. And so we have a whole number of strategies, high-level strategies that will be adopted. For example, looking at electrification of new construction, and there's some work being done right now in response to some business commentary, but electrification ordinances so that we mandate construction, and more on that will be released before June 29th. We're looking at retrofitting buildings and also some measures on sustainable land use. So that's the main category for the built environment. Active transportation, which I know has a lot of applicability to those that are on this session. We're looking at active transportation, transit and shared mobility, and then zero emission vehicles. And then under the community health and resiliency bucket, we have urban greening and forestry with a very, very bold goal on the number of trees we want to plant and access to open space. Looking at sustainable food systems in the region, and also our resilience for future disasters, whether they're man-made or natural. So I will send a link, as I said, to everyone. We are still taking comment through June 29th on those projects. And in year 1, I want to just highlight a couple of the projects that are coming. The first is to invest in workforce training programs, and that's where we need the support of Clean Start, the California Mobility Center and the Civic Lab to assist with that. And did I hear a question? I think you'll see some CARES Act investment from the city of Sacramento into the into the California Mobility Center, and also to Civic Lab. So we'll be working on that. And then something that I'll come to at the end is an environmental justice community advisory group. And this goes back to the council adopting a climate emergency plan or climate emergency declaration in December. And we will be working with our advocates to set up a community-led EJ committee, which will work on prioritizing where best to spend the funds from the city. So I'll stop there just on the Mayor's Climate Commission and see if there's any comments or questions on that. No? Okay. The Mayor's Climate Commission is advisory to both the city of West Sacramento and the city of Sacramento. And the way that much of this will be enacted, in addition to ordinances like an electrification ordinance, is through the city's general plan and climate action plan. And we have already been working on both. There have been multiple public hearings, and now they are virtual public hearings to comment on that. This is the city's land use and basically value statement for how the city will grow in the future, and it will carry us through 2040. So I noticed that they're posting some links. The general plan and climate action plan are probably the most important policy documents that will be created in the next year by the city. And much of the work of the Mayor's Climate Commission will go into that climate action plan. And Rincon is the consultant putting together the climate action plan. They're doing all the modeling for us on the carbon reduction measures that come out of all of the projects that we can do as a city, including things like electrification of transportation, electrification of buildings from a carbon reduction standpoint. And so I really encourage those of you who have time to take a look at those documents and comment. And I know we work very closely with our partners like Rosanna and Leroy at SMUD. Without them, the city could not do what we're going to do with bold and fundamental action in the next few years. So I'll stop there again and see if there's any comments that anyone wants to make on that. No?
Well, it sounds like we should look at the carbon reduction measures, Julia, for business opportunities for our community here. There'll be a lot of programs and incentives, I assume, in that.
Absolutely.
So another reason why we should make sure we're looking at that document.
Yep. And I'll put it all together in one email that Thomas can send to everyone afterwards, all these links to these programs. Things, you know, we're seeing a really big shift in the way that we work right now. I just was on a SACOG telecommuting focus group this week, and our IT director for the city of Sacramento said the city went from 5 employees telecommuting to 2,000 telecommuting in 1 week. And that the VMT declines as a result of that in the SACOG region from all of our agencies having to go work at home has been between a 50 and a 70% reduction in VMT. So what are the opportunities that come from continuing to work at home, but also what does that mean for the future of the workforce and the workplace? And how can we use technology? And VMT, I'm sorry, is vehicle miles traveled, which is how many miles that we're all spending commuting and going out to restaurants. We had a significant drop in the region, as did most of the country, which directly relates to reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And there needs to be some more technology that comes along with this work. I know many of the state agencies are looking at how do we keep this going from that perspective of all of the investments that need to be made, upgrades in things like digital access and broadband, equipment upgrades, new inventions that will come as we hopefully get to work more at home in the future. And lots more work there. And I'm just going to really quickly highlight each of these. So CARES Act is the federal legislation that has provided funding, fortunately, to cities greater than 500,000. And because our folks in the city filled out their census forms way back in 2010, and we've continued through the American Community Survey. The city of Sacramento is 508,000 people. So please, please, please fill out your census this time as well. Because we are 508,000 people, the city received $89 million in CARES Act funding. And we are spending that in several buckets, not least of which is workforce investment and the California Mobility Center. So the council has had two formal discussions on those allocations of funding out into the community, and we'll continue those discussions. Obviously, some of it needs to go to the emergency response and food insecurity and things like that, but there will be a significant amount of money going into workforce investment out of the $89 million that the city of Sacramento was awarded. Another place for us to have touch points into the city of Sacramento is to send in a letter, comment, clean start, take a position on where you think these funds should be spent. And in the comments, it's can startups qualify for this fund? What's happening is, what I recommend is that Clean Start send in the letter as an entity with your recommendations on how a portion of the workforce money can be spent. And so underneath that umbrella of a Clean Start request would be absolutely startups could qualify for this fund if you are assisting our region in responding to COVID, and you can demonstrate that. And part of that is, yes, we're putting people back to work who have lost their jobs, or yes, we're inventing a new technology, or working on accelerating technologies that help us address COVID response. But the job losses and the unemployment rate going up is all part of COVID response. So if you are, because you have some seed funding or some funding in your intermediate stage, if you are hiring more people, you are absolutely part of COVID response and would qualify. The Sac Metro Chamber did submit a letter along with some other partner agencies on that investment. And I think that Clean Start should absolutely also take a position in this. And so this is perfect timing because those discussions are ongoing and because the $89 million has to be spent by December 2020. This is all funding per the Treasury that has to go out the door now. So, and I can certainly assist in future conversations with how best to get the coordinated letter into the city to be considered. And at the same time, the county, because they are also over 500,000 people, received CARES Act funding. And I mistakenly listed that there is an open application process. That intelligence is not correct. So I wanted to make sure that I said that. The county is also looking at how to spend their CARES Act money, but there is not an open application process online. So my apologies for that mistake on the slide. I do think it's worth having some conversations with your Sacramento County representatives on how best they can invest in the future. So any questions on CARES Act before I go to the prosperity strategy here?
Julia, this is JD. Do you know how much money the county received?
$180 million.
Thank
So
you.
city of Sacramento, 89 million, the county 180. And obviously a lot of their funding needs to go to their response because they are in charge of the public health response. But part of it is supposed to go to recovery in response to all of the damage that the COVID-19 epidemic has done in our region. And so it's 180.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions on CARES Act?
What's the deadline on getting a letter in?
Well, I think it's a rolling, at least for the city of Sacramento, it's been an ongoing discussion. They've had 2 meetings, as I said, but I think that this is an opportunity. I would say if you can get it in within the next couple weeks to a month, that would be very helpful to the council considering whatever strategies that you'd like to put forward. And Daniel is saying that crisis manufacturing, he thinks, is what was missing. There is a proposal from the China office, actually, Tony Young, who is it's part of my portfolio to work with our China office in Chongqing, and there's another one that's just been stood up in Hunan province. And they are looking at doing some emergency manufacturing for PPE equipment in our region. And if there is a crisis manufacturing idea that you have, there's actually two places to bring that in. The first would be into a CARES Act letter. And the second is that Lewis Stewart, who is our Chief Innovation Officer, has put out a call for technology ideas that can address COVID. And I can send that link out to everyone as well. Lewis used to work for GoBiz at the state of California. I know many of you know him. And we are fortunate enough to have him in the city of Sacramento. He works jointly with the mayor's office in the Office of Innovation and Economic Development. And he's looking for any ideas that can help us with our response. There we go. There's Lewis Stewart's information, and your portfolios work well into that. And he has some grant funding that he can seed some of this crisis response. So great comment from Daniel. Thank you for prompting that. I should have had Lewis's mark in this slide. I also want to talk about, and I'm sure you'll have other conversations about this because of your membership and who's on the line, but Trish Kelly and Valley Vision, Sacramento Chamber, Greater Sacramento Economic, it's GSEC, Greater Sacramento, I always forget what it stands for, I apologize, but Barry Broom's group. They just published our SEDS, which is a federal document that qualifies us for future federal funding and kind of organizes our work. And at the link that was posted earlier to this prosperity strategy, there are some key core strategies, which I think our region has emphasized before, but they're saying it again, that we in Sacramento would like to be the global leader for entrepreneurs, firms, and workforce in three key areas: food, ag, and health innovation, life sciences, and future mobility. And that's where a lot of your work is happening right now. One of the things that we're hopeful, either through this Congress, which may be difficult in the event of a change in administration, is that there is a very significant infrastructure investment to support economic clusters. And I didn't represent the mayor's office. That's my personal opinion on a change of administration there. That we would see a significant Green New Deal or something that would bring infrastructure investment into our regions. And we are perfectly positioned to take advantage of that. The prosperity strategy also says that we want to expand our workforce development aligned to opportunity clusters for inclusive workforce. And we want to be very business friendly, which I think we've shown we've made great progress on that in the region. It is worth reading at least the executive summary of that SEDS to see where your work and your individual organizations align with this. It involved quite a bit of community input from the business side. And Trish Kelly is just such a wonderful writer too. It's a very easy document to read and qualifies us for future funding that may come.
Julia, I want to call on Rosanna Herber. She has her hand up, I think.
Yep.
Question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, kind of back to the county, the money that they got. Do you know what the process is for them to make decisions about this? Like I know, I haven't seen that they're taking public comment anywhere, and I'm just wondering, is it going to be a decision made by the county board, or is it delegated to the county CEO? Just curious if you know.
I think the Board of Supervisors has to both accept the money, which I believe they've done, and they have to figure out how to spend the money and approve that. So I think there will be definitely action by the Board of Supervisors on how they allocate the money. And again, they've had quite a bit of expenditure on the response side, so I don't know how they're dividing up the funding between the county expenses that they had for response and then the funding that they'll distribute in different ways to help us recover here in Sacramento County. So that's a good question. And why don't I pledge to call into the county and find out what the process is, and then I can send that information over to Thomas today as well.
Great, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions so far? Okay, and the last point I wanted to cover is that as part of the Mayor's Climate Commission and a lot of work that's happened under Mayor Steinberg, at least in my year at the city, is that we will be and have had a focus on equity and environmental justice throughout the Mayor's Climate Commission process, largely due to the contributions of several climate commissioners in particular, and that's Naila Pope Hardin, who is an activist in South Sacramento, Stephanie Bray from United Way, and April Wick, who runs the Resources for Independent Living and is a great representative of our able-bodied and disabled communities. We have a set of equity principles that will be published as part of the Mayor's Climate Commission. And one of my tasks immediately following the work of the Climate Commission that will be adopted is to convene or help facilitate, I won't be a member of, but a community-led environmental justice committee to help us prioritize where investments will be. And that can be everything from physical projects like green spaces and trees in neighborhoods that have not had canopies traditionally in the city's history. It can also be workforce projects and projects with partners like we have at the Air Quality Management District, where they're doing micro hubs and work to facilitate the embracing of electric vehicles in communities that traditionally have not been able to afford them through charging infrastructure and incentive programs. So this community group will meet starting hopefully in July. And parallel to that, there has been an environmental justice there is required to be now an environmental justice element of the general plan. And so there have been a number of meetings facilitated by Jackie Cole from Veritable Good to include communities that have not traditionally had access to all of the public hearing process and the general plan work in our community. So I really look forward to hopefully working with Clean Start in this work as well. We want to go carbon neutral, but we certainly don't want to have unintended consequences in that work. And I know lots of conversations with entities like SMUD, wherein if we adopt a measure to reduce our, to retrofit neighborhoods that are currently gas and electric to all electric, what does that mean? If we want to have leaf blowers that are all electric, what does that mean for the small business owners that have invested much of their savings into equipment to run their businesses? So lots of conversations coming. I think it's so important right now because environmental justice, as we know, is racial justice and it is social justice. And a lot of my time and work post Mayor's Climate Commission will be spent on that. And I know the mayor has made that one of his top priorities as well. So with that, I'm happy to listen, answer any questions, take suggestions that I can bring back to the mayor's office, and work with all of you going forward to bring people back to work, and look forward to working with you.
This is Rosanna, and I just want to thank you, Julia, for your leadership, for the mayor and his leadership. And I did want to say that I think that we're hoping that, this aspirational goal that the mayor's climate commission put out there, that we would strive to be, carbon neutral by 2030. Instead of looking at the small folks who do the leaf blowing and mowing, I think there's really much bigger bang for the buck if we're able to get the small cities and the county to begin looking at phasing out their gas equipment and to go to electric equipment. It's on a much larger scale. We're definitely, I know at SMUD, we've got a program that's going to be coming out in the fall for the small business folks who do lawns. But I think the real opportunity is in, public institutions that have a lot of parks and recreation areas. So I'd love it if you could let the mayor know that, we'd really like to see the city be, looking at how they can phase out their gas mower equipment and go electric. And and SMUD will be there to help you.
I absolutely agree with you. One of the first things that I did when I came to the city is formed an internal green team. We had one at the city of Roseville when I worked there. And so now we get together with all the sustainability directors and managers from all the different departments at least once a month. And on the list of things to do is to look at our own procurement. And after sitting through one of the meetings on the lawn equipment, we definitely have to lead by example at the city, both in replacing our electric vehicle fleet, for example, and in replacing the maintenance equipment that we use throughout all of the city properties. And so that's absolutely on the list of things to do, Rosanna, and thank you for calling that out. That the city needs to lead by example, and we need to encourage our neighbors and other agencies to do the same.
I had a kind of a question on focusing on electrification and things. I know SMUD has taken a role on providing rebates so that people can convert to electrification. And I wanted to kind of highlight our last Clean Tech meetup that I'm posting a video of that starts at when Panama Bartholomew talked about why building decarbonization is so important, because our biggest source of emissions and the ones that people are exposed to are in buildings.
Mm-hmm.
But so what roles when it comes to, I guess, future planning of buildings and even dealing with kind of, I guess, potential retrofits of existing buildings, do you think that the city can take in reducing those emissions?
Well, we have a very important role, and we're kind of looking at it on two tracks. The first is new construction. And so we don't want to build anything new that has stranded assets in the future when we do convert to all electric from gas. And so we'll look at some of those ordinances which require, at least in the short term, low-rise construction, because it's actually less expensive to build an all-electric building than it is to build an electric and a gas building. You just don't have to put as much infrastructure in. So the city has a role in ordinances for new construction going forward, and we'll probably see that as an early win. The harder one is the retrofitting existing property, retrofitting existing infrastructure. If you look at a neighborhood that has gas, you have to replace not just the lines coming in or detrunk the lines, you have to replace the appliances in the home. And there are pilot projects. For example, Oakland's looking at a neighborhood retrofit. Well, they'll test the whole neighborhood going all electric, and we would hope to do the same in the future. The current recommendation from the Climate Commission is to start retrofit to the point that 25% of the city is retrofitted to all electric by 2030, and then we keep making progress over time. So the city has to be the leader along hand in hand with SMUD to make those changes. And I'm so glad that you had Panama on, because he's, you know, the key rock star in the whole state, and he can tell the story from a public health perspective as well on the indoor air pollution and the indoor asthma that's caused by burning fossil fuels in the home. So we have to take a stand as the city and include that in our climate action plan and in our ordinances.
I might call on Eugene Lee to give some input on this, because I know he's been working with, he just commented, with the CEC and tracking of emissions from buildings. But I know the CEC and their EPIC funding is looking at how do we get new technologies into the hands of builders and construction and the people doing these retrofits, because typically they like to go to, you know, what they know and what they have experience with, as opposed to, you know, trying something new. And I'm not exactly sure how to phrase it, but is there a kind of a place for the city to say, hey, you know, we have these companies like, whether it's Hank or other ones that are pushing clean building solutions in Sacramento, that we really want people that are building in Sacramento to take advantage of?
I think, you know, we can't sole source or recommend one, but if there are a list of companies, especially if they're homegrown here in Sacramento, that we can suggest they work with, absolutely. And that you know, can come out of something out of a policy shop like the mayor's office versus, you know, counter staff in the planning department. But that's certainly something we can look at. And to Eugene's comment, I am not aware that we have discussed this local building benchmarking ordinance, but that's not to say that something hasn't happened in the community development, building, or planning departments. And so I will follow up and check on that.